Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bookercast, the podcast where books come to life.
And I'm so excited to dive into another amazing story with all of you.
Whether you're a bookworm or just love a good story, this is the place for you.
Every episode, we explore incredible books, talk about their stories and characters, and share insights that'll make you fall in love with reading all over again.
All right, let's not keep you waiting any longer. Get comfortable, and let's jump right into it.
Sounds good.
All right, let's jump into Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's been making some noise in the negotiation world.
Yeah.
When we think about negotiation, we think like boardrooms and big million-dollar deals. But what's interesting here is that Voss has a very different background.
Right.
He was the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator.
Yeah, for over 20 years.
For over 20 years. So talk about intense.
Talk about high stakes. Yeah, that's where it gets interesting, because it's those life or death situations that really shaped his whole approach to negotiation.
Yeah.
He realized pretty quickly that traditional negotiation tactics, the things that they might teach, at Harvard or in business school, often fell short in the real world, especially when you've got these highly charged emotional situations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Textbook strategies might work in, a very controlled environment. But hostage situations, terrorist negotiations, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what makes Voss's method so different. Is this a guy who goes in guns blazing, or is it much more about subtle psychology?
I think it's definitely more about the subtle psychology.
Okay.
He discovered that negotiation is less about logic and, arguing your point, and much more about understanding the psychology of the other person.
Right.
Really getting inside their head, understanding their fears, their desires, even their biases. And he calls this tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy. I like that.
Yeah.
So it's not just about feeling sorry for someone.
No.
It's about using empathy strategically to get what you want.
To your advantage, exactly.
But how do you actually do that?
Well, one of the key techniques is something called mirroring.
Okay.
Sounds simple, but incredibly powerful. Voss tells a story about negotiating with these fugitives who are barricaded inside an apartment building.
Oh, wow.
And for hours, he talked to them using this very calm, soothing voice, like a late-night FM DJ.
Oh, wow.
And it completely disarmed them. It got them talking.
So almost like by matching their tone and demeanor, he was able to create that sense of trust. Like, hey, this guy gets me. But I imagine there's more to it than just mimicking someone's voice.
Absolutely. Voss also emphasizes the importance of labeling, which is about explicitly acknowledging the other person's emotions.
Okay.
Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but studies have actually shown that when you label someone's feelings, it can actually reduce the intensity of those emotions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So instead of, saying to someone like, calm down,
Right.
you would say something like, it seems like you're feeling really frustrated right now.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. I can see how that might make someone feel heard and understood rather than just being dismissed.
And by acknowledging those emotions, you create an opportunity for them to actually open up and explain why they're feeling that way.
Oh, okay. I'm starting to see how this ties together.
Yeah.
So you're using tactical empathy, mirroring, and labeling to build rapport, get people talking, and ultimately gain that advantage in the negotiation.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that Voss actually went to Harvard after his time in the FBI.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He took a negotiation course there.
I wonder how that went.
And guess what?
What?
He consistently out-negotiated Harvard law students using his FBI tactics.
Oh, really? I bet they weren't expecting that.
No, they were not. They were pretty surprised.
Wow. I guess all those legal textbooks didn't really prepare them for the real world.
Yeah. It's a different ballgame.
But that begs the question. Why did his tactics work so well? These are brilliant legal minds.
Right.
What was he tapping into that they weren't?
Because Voss understood something they didn't, the power of cognitive biases.
Okay.
And this is where the work of Daniel Kahneman comes in.
Daniel Kahneman.
Nobel Prize-winning psychologist.
Oh, yeah, Kahneman. I read some of his stuff.
Right. He's brilliant.
He talks about how our brains are hardwired to make irrational decisions.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Even when we think we're being completely logical.
Yeah, like the framing effect.
Yeah.
How people react differently to the same choice depending on how it's presented.
Exactly. Or loss aversion, where the pain of losing something outweighs the pleasure of gaining the same thing.
Right.
And Voss realized that these biases are always at play, even in seemingly rational negotiations.
So knowing about these biases, how did Voss actually use them to his advantage?
Well, he understood that you couldn't just rely on logic alone to sway someone
Right.
who is deeply influenced by their own biases.
Right.
So instead, he focused on understanding their emotional landscape
Yeah.
and using that to kind of nudge them in the desired direction.
Okay, so it's like he's playing 4D chess
Yeah,
while everyone else is stuck on checkers.
exactly.
But I'm still curious about the specifics. Can you give us an example as how Voss used these psychological insights to actually win a negotiation?
Sure. So he tells a story about selling Washington Redskins season tickets
Okay.
during a really bad economic downturn.
Oh, yeah.
And most people were really focused on the cost,
Makes sense.
but the sales team, using Voss's methods,
Okay.
they reframed the pitch. Instead of ignoring the tough times, they acknowledged them. They would say something like, "It seems like you're concerned about the economy."
Interesting.
This simple act of labeling,
Yeah.
it just built rapport and it opened the door for a deeper conversation.
So they weren't trying to pretend that everything was fine. They were meeting the customers where they were emotionally.
Exactly.
Okay.
By acknowledging the customer's anxieties, they were able to position the season tickets not as this frivolous expense, but as a source of, enjoyment, normalcy during a really difficult time.
Yeah, I mean, that's smart. They turned a potential no into a yes
Right?
by understanding the customer psychology.
Exactly.
It sounds like Voss's methods are all about flipping the script on traditional negotiation.
He definitely challenges the conventional wisdom.
Right.
In fact, one of the most surprising things he advocates for is the power of no.
Wait, the power of no? Isn't the goal of any negotiation to get to yes?
Well, you think you're right. But Voss argues that yes is often a meaningless answer.
Okay.
People say yes to avoid conflict or to please others. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they agree or that they're committed to the outcome.
That's so true. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a yes from someone only to have them back out later.
Right. It's just a meaningless yes.
So how does Voss use no to his advantage?
Well, he believes that no gives people a sense of control and safety.
Okay.
It allows them to express their concerns without feeling pressured.
Right.
So instead of asking, "Do you want to do this?"
Right.
which invites a polite yes,
Yeah.
he might say, "Is now a bad time to talk?"
Oh, that's brilliant. It almost forces them to consider their true feelings and opens the door for a much more honest conversation.
Exactly. It triggers a more genuine response, and it allows you to address their objections head on.
Okay, I'm really starting to see the power of no. But if yes isn't the ultimate goal, what is?
Voss says the real goal is to get to, "That's right."
That's right. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Well, that's right. It signifies true understanding and agreement, not just compliance. It means that the other person has internalized your message and they see things from your perspective.
Great.
He recounts this tense negotiation with Abu Sabaya, who was the leader of the group that kidnapped an American named Jeffrey Schilling in the Philippines.
Wow.
And Sabaya was incredibly volatile. He was demanding millions of dollars in war damages for Schilling's release.
Oh my gosh, that sounds incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
How did Voss handle that?
Well, he realized that arguing with this guy or trying to reason with him was getting them nowhere.
Yeah.
So they shifted tactics.
Okay.
And they started using summaries to reflect Sabaya's perspective back to him,
Okay.
acknowledging his demands, his grievances.
So instead of saying, you're wrong, they were saying, it seems like you feel very strongly about this.
Exactly. And it worked. After one particularly accurate summary, Sabaya finally uttered those magic words, "That's right."
Wow.
And from that point on, the negotiation took a much more productive turn.
That's incredible. So by simply reflecting back Sabaya's own words and feelings, they were able to break through his defenses and build a connection.
Right.
It sounds like a powerful validation technique.
It really is. And it can be used in everyday situations, too.
Really?
Voss tells a story about trying to convince his son, Brandon, to switch positions on his football team.
Oh, okay.
And Brandon was initially resistant.
Yeah.
But by using summaries to highlight the benefits of the new position from Brandon's perspective,
Okay.
Voss was able to get his son to see the value in it.
So instead of saying, you should switch positions, he said something like, it seems like you're worried about getting less playing time if you switch.
Exactly. And eventually Brandon Kieran said, "That's right."
Yeah.
He wasn't just agreeing, he was understanding.
Right. It was that deeper level.
Yeah.
Okay. So far, we've talked about tactical empathy. Mirroring, labeling the power of no and getting it. It's like, that's right. I mean, it's a lot to process.
It is.
But I can see how these concepts could be incredibly valuable in all sorts of negotiations, big and small.
Absolutely. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, no.
Voss goes on to discuss even more advanced techniques for bending reality, using deadlines strategically and uncovering hidden information,
Okay.
what he calls black swans,
Oh, boy.
that can change the entire dynamic of a negotiation.
Hold on. We're just getting to the good stuff.
I know, it's getting really interesting.
Okay.
But before we dive into those advanced tactics, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll explore how Voss uses these psychological principles to bend reality and gain the upper hand in any negotiation.
Sounds good. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork with tactical empathy
Mm-hmm.
and understanding the power of no and
Yeah.
so, right. Now, you mentioned bending reality. What did Voss mean by that? It sounds pretty intense.
It does sound intense. He's not talking about magic tricks or anything.
Right.
It's more about understanding these psychological levers that can influence how people perceive a situation. And using that to your advantage, one of the key levers is deadlines.
Deadlines. I usually think of those as working against me, not for me.
Right. That's the conventional wisdom. But Voss challenges that. He argues that deadlines, even if they're artificial, can actually create a sense of urgency that works in your favor. He gives a really fascinating story about a surge in kidnappings in Haiti, and the FBI noticed a pattern. The kidnappers were much more eager to settle as the weekend approached.
So they were using the weekend deadline to their advantage.
Exactly.
Clever. But wouldn't that mean you'd have to keep your deadline secret?
Not necessarily. Voss suggests that revealing your deadline can sometimes be beneficial as long as you do it strategically. He cites research showing that if you frame it in a way that emphasizes the negative consequences of not reaching a deal by the deadline, it can actually motivate the other side to act.
So it's about creating a sense of urgency without sounding desperate. Okay, deadlines make sense. What about this other lever you mentioned? Fairness.
Ah, fairness. This one's a big one. We humans are just hardwired to crave fairness, even to the point of irrationality. There's this classic experiment called the ultimatum game,
Okay.
and it demonstrates this perfectly. So basically, one person gets a sum of money.
Okay. And they have to propose a split with another person. If the second person rejects the offer, no one gets any money.
So logically, the second person should accept any offer, even if it's just $1.
Right.
Something is better than nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's not what happens. People consistently reject offers that they perceive as unfair,
Really?
even if it means losing out financially. It's all about feeling respected and treated equitably.
Wow. That's fascinating. So how does Voss use this understanding of fairness in negotiations?
Well, he gives the example of Robin Williams' contract dispute with Disney
Oh, okay.
over the movie Aladdin.
I remember that.
Right. Williams felt that Disney had used his voice for merchandise without his consent, which he considered unfair.
Right.
And you know how Disney eventually resolved that dispute. They sent Robin Williams a Picasso painting worth a reported $1 million.
$1 million painting. That's a pretty big concession
It is
to appease someone's sense of fairness. But I guess Disney understood the value of keeping Robin Williams happy.
exactly. Voss's point is that fairness is a powerful motivator.
Even in these high-stakes business dealings. He also cautions against the manipulative use of the word fair.
Okay.
Sometimes people throw it around to pressure the other side
Right.
into accepting their terms, even when it's not truly equitable.
Right. So like, this is my final offer. Take it or leave it. It's more than fair. I've definitely heard that one before.
Exactly. It's important to be aware of those tactics
Yeah.
and to push back if you feel like someone is using fairness as a weapon. Now, the final lever that Voss talks about is called anchoring.
Anchoring. Like a boat anchor.
Not quite, but the concept is similar in a way. Anchoring is about setting a reference point that influences how the other side perceives value.
Okay.
It plays on our tendency to compare things to a baseline, even if that baseline is arbitrary.
Okay. I'm starting to see how that could be useful in negotiation. So like if you're selling a car, you might start by mentioning a higher price, even if you're willing to go lower.
Exactly. You're setting an anchor in the buyer's mind, making your lower offer seem more reasonable by comparison. Voss talks about how Disney used anchoring to resolve that dispute with Robin Williams. They kept reminding him of the very favorable terms of his initial contract,
Oh, okay.
which made the eventual settlement feel less like a loss.
So it's all about framing and perception. Interesting. But let's say the other side throws out a ridiculous anchor. How do you deal with that?
Well, Voss suggests being prepared to deflect those extreme anchors. You might say something like, "That's an interesting number, but let's talk about what's realistic." He also recommends offering a range to set a higher baseline.
Okay, so it's like a strategic countermove. You're not just accepting their anchor, you're establishing your own. What other anchoring techniques does he suggest?
He also talks about pivoting to non-monetary terms. For example, if you're negotiating a salary, you could focus on things like vacation time or work from home days.
Okay.
This can make your offer seem more appealing without actually increasing the cost to the other side.
That's smart. You're finding creative ways to create value without getting stuck on a single number. So we've covered deadlines, fairness, and anchoring. These bending reality tactics seem pretty powerful, but they also sound a bit manipulative.
That's a valid concern. But Voss emphasizes that these techniques should be used ethically. It's not about tricking people.
Right.
It's about understanding how their minds work and using that knowledge to find solutions that work for everyone.
So it's not about winning at all costs. It's about finding common ground.
Exactly. And sometimes finding that common ground requires uncovering hidden information. What Voss calls black swans.
Black swans. Wait, isn't that a book by Nassim Taleb?
Yes. Voss borrows the concept from Taleb's work.
Yeah.
Black swans are those unexpected pieces of information that can completely change the game. They're the unknowns that we don't even know exist, but they can have a massive impact on the outcome of a negotiation.
Can you give us an example of a black swan in action?
Sure. Voss tells this story about a student who was trying to get a promotion from his former boss, and the boss was hesitant. But the student eventually uncovered a black swan. His boss desperately needed an ally at headquarters to support his own career ambitions.
So the student's black swan was his boss's hidden need for an ally.
Exactly. Once he understood this, he was able to position himself as the solution to his boss's problem, which ultimately led to his promotion.
Wow, that's a perfect example of how uncovering a black swan can shift the entire dynamic of a negotiation. But how do you even go about finding these black swans? They sound pretty elusive.
Well, Voss says that black swans often reveal themselves in seemingly irrational behavior or offhand comments. It's about paying close attention and connecting the dots. He tells another story about a client trying to land Coca-Cola as a customer, and their contact at the company suddenly went silent, which seemed odd.
They did some digging to figure out why.
Exactly. They discovered that their contact had been sidelined in a corporate power struggle. He was too embarrassed to admit he no longer had the authority to move the deal forward. That was their black swan.
So instead of wasting time with someone who couldn't help them, they found someone who actually had the power to make a decision.
That's brilliant. It sounds like black swans are all about understanding the bigger picture, the hidden motivations and dynamics at play.
Absolutely. Voss says black swans act as leverage multipliers.
Okay.
He identifies 3 types of leverage: positive, negative, and normative. Positive leverage is the ability to give someone what they want.
Like offering a higher salary or a better benefits package.
Right. Negative leverage is the ability to inflict pain, which is obviously a more aggressive tactic.
Like threatening to walk away from the deal or go to a competitor.
Exactly. And finally, normative leverage is about using your counterpart's norms and values to influence their behavior. This is where understanding their religion comes in.
By religion, you mean their deeply held beliefs and principles, not necessarily their spiritual beliefs. No.
Exactly. Voss tells this amazing story about a standoff with Dwight Watson, this North Carolina farmer who threatened to blow himself up in Washington, D.C.
And the FBI was able to peacefully resolve the situation by understanding Watson's religious beliefs and appealing to his sense of morality.
So they used his own values to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Right. Understanding someone's values can be incredibly powerful, especially when combined with the other techniques we've discussed.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about tactical empathy, the power of no and bending reality with deadlines, fairness, and anchoring, and uncovering those game-changing black swans. I mean, it's a lot to take in.
It is.
But I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Me too.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah, and we're not done yet. Voss also provides specific tactics,
Oh.
nor the actual bargaining phase, like the Ackerman model, which is a powerful technique for making concessions effectively.
Okay.
He also emphasizes the importance of understanding your own negotiation style
Right.
and how to adapt it to different situations.
This is also fascinating. I feel like I'm getting a crash course in the psychology of negotiation.
It is a lot to process, But remember, the key takeaway is that negotiation is ultimately about human connection and understanding.
Yeah.
It's about using emotional intelligence and strategic thinking to find solutions that work for everyone.
Well, I can't wait to hear about the Ackerman model and those bargaining tactics you mentioned.
We'll get to it.
But I guess we'll have to save that for next time.
Yes.
Okay, so last time we left off, you were about to tell us about these bargaining tactics that Voss recommends.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about the psychological groundwork, tactical empathy, black swans, bending reality.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you actually get to that point where you close the deal?
Right. Well, even before you get to that point, Voss really emphasizes the importance of knowing your walkaway point.
Okay.
He's a firm believer in no deal is better than a bad deal.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to walk away if the other side just can't meet your needs.
That makes sense. It's about knowing your worth and not settling for less.
Yeah.
But once you are at the bargaining table, what are some specific tactics that Voss recommends?
Well, one technique he advocates for is the Ackerman model,
Ackerman model. Okay.
which is a system for making concessions in a way that maximizes your gains
Okay.
while still making the other side feel like they're winning.
I love that. Making them feel like they're winning.
Yes.
How does it work?
So the Ackerman model uses these decreasing increments.
Okay.
Instead of making big jumps in your offers,
Right.
you make smaller and smaller concessions as you get closer to your target price.
Okay.
Voss suggests using a 65, 85, 95, 100% approach.
Okay, break that down for me.
Okay, so let's say you're selling something and your target price is $100.
Okay.
You might start by offering it for $65.
Okay.
Then, if the other side pushes back, you counter with 85,
Mhm.
then 95, and finally 100.
So each concession is progressively smaller, making the other side feel like they're chipping away at your resistance.
Exactly. It creates a sense of momentum, and it makes it more likely that they'll agree to your final offer. And Voss also points out the psychological impact of using non-round numbers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So like offering $98 instead of $100?
Exactly.
Why is that? It seems like such a small difference.
It's a psychological thing because it feels more specific and considered.
Right.
Like you really put thought into it. A round number like $100 can feel arbitrary.
Oh,
Like you just pulled it out of thin air.
right. It seems like you just made it up.
Right.
It's amazing how much goes on beneath the surface
It is.
in a negotiation.
It really is.
Yeah.
And Voss believes that everyone has a personal negotiation style,
Okay.
and understanding yours can help you be more effective.
So it's not just about learning these tactics.
Right.
It's also about understanding yourself and how you approach conflict.
Exactly. Voss identifies 3 main negotiating styles: accommodator, assertive, and analyst.
Can you describe each one briefly?
Sure. So accommodators, they really prioritize relationships and harmony. They're willing to make concessions to avoid conflict. Assertive negotiators are much more focused on getting their way. They're not afraid to push hard to achieve their goals.
Okay.
And then you have analysts who are all about data and information.
Got it.
They carefully consider all the options before making a decision.
Okay. So knowing your own style
Mm-hmm.
and being able to identify the style of the person that you're negotiating with
Right.
must be incredibly helpful in tailoring your approach.
Absolutely. Voss tells this funny story about being mirrored by a colleague during a training session.
Okay.
He didn't realize how assertive his own negotiating style was until his colleagues started mimicking his tone and body language.
Really?
Yeah, it was a real wake-up call for him.
That's hilarious. It's so easy to fall into patterns without even realizing it.
It really is. Self-awareness is key.
Yeah.
And it's also important to remember that never split the difference isn't just about winning at all costs.
Right.
It's about using emotional intelligence, strategic thinking to find creative solutions that work for everyone involved.
So it's not a zero-sum game.
No.
It's about finding common ground,
Hmm.
building relationships. It sounds like this book offers a lot of valuable insights, not just for those high-stakes negotiations,
Right.
but for everyday life as well.
Absolutely. These principles can be applied to everything, from negotiating a raise with your boss
Right.
to resolving conflicts with your partner or your kids.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into Never Split the Difference.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground, from tactical empathy and the power of no to bending reality and uncovering black swans.
Yeah.
What are your final thoughts on the book?
Well, I think Voss offers a really fresh perspective on negotiation.
Yeah.
One that goes beyond that traditional win-lose thinking.
Yeah.
He emphasizes the importance of understanding human psychology
Right.
and using that knowledge to create mutually beneficial outcomes.
Right. It's not just about getting what you want.
Exactly.
It's about making sure everyone feels good about the agreement.
It's about finding that win-win.
Exactly. Well, it's definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
So for our listeners out there, if you're intrigued by what you've heard today, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Never Split the Difference and diving in yourself. It's packed with even more real-life stories and actionable advice that we didn't have time to cover.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of BookerCast. We hope you enjoyed diving into it as much as we did. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts on this episode.
Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this episode with your fellow book lovers. And let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. See you in the next deep dive. Bye for now, and happy reading.